think it will thrill you. It may shock you. It might even horrify you. So if any of you feel that you do not care to subject your nerves to such a strain, now is your chance to, well, we've warned you.
Hello, Cassettes, and welcome back to the Black Case Diaries.
Oh, hello.
Ooh, hey!
It's finally Frightening February
No.
once again. And we are thrilled to be learning everything we can about spooky movies and TV, and hopefully teaching you in the process. I'm Robin.
I'm Marcy.
I'm Adam, I guess.
Hey!
Welcome back.
This Frightening February is going to be a little different than usual with our very special live episode at the end of the month. So at the end of this month, we're having a live episode
Yeah.
instead
Yes.
of a regular one.
A very live one that you need to join because it'll be great.
Yes. But for right now, we're celebrating this monstrous month with another full-length episode.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Ayo. Back in the era regarded as the golden age of Hollywood, there were 5 big studios that essentially controlled film production. Back then, studios were vertically integrated, which meant that every stage of production happened in-house. The studios even owned the theaters that would show their films, and actors weren't paid by the picture, but instead had salaries and contracts. Because of this system, it was virtually impossible for independent artists to break into the industry. Besides the Big 5, there were a few smaller studios that produced films that weren't widely distributed because they owned fewer theaters. Universal Pictures was one of them. Founded in 1912 by Carl Laemmle, Universal achieved fame for producing popular low-budget serials starting in 1914. And although it didn't produce the most prestigious film content of the time, Universal developed a reputation as a studio that catered to its audience. So, when other studios turned up their noses at a genre that focused on thrilling moviegoers with grotesque visuals and terrifying tales, Universal had found what would become their most well-known niche, monster movies.
Yes.
While MGM was filming Dorothy as she skipped down the yellow brick road to see The Wizard of Oz, a film in production that was a horror film in its own right, Universal was in the middle of building a cinematic universe so iconic that it would change the horror genre forever. Between 1923 and 1960, they produced 43 films that would become known as the Universal Monster Movies. Tonight, we're looking into the bone-chilling history of some of these movies and discussing the indelible mark they made on cinematic history.
43.
Yeah. That's a
films.
lot.
Yeah. So grab some popcorn and your comfiest blanket. It's time for a monstrous film history lesson.
Oh, boy.
Yay! This episode's all about history. Woo!
History.
I mean, every episode we do is, but this one a little more than
This
usual.
one, yeah, this one feels a lot more
This one's a little more jam-packed.
historical.
Get ready.
Let's get historical. So what do you guys think of the Universal Monster movies?
Whew.
Do you guys have favorite monsters?
They are incredibly iconic in every facet of like horror and spooky things, right? They
Yeah.
are icons of Halloween. They are icons of this genre. It's just, everyone recognizes most of
Yeah.
these things,
Yeah.
right?
Yep.
Frankenstein, Dracula, Mummy,
Mm-hmm.
The Invisible Man. You can go on, right?
Yep.
And if I had to pick a favorite, I don't know if I could.
Yeah. Yeah.
There are really good ones.
Yeah.
I always like the Wolfman.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Just something about it. It's just cool.
Yeah.
But they're all good.
Yeah.
Yeah.
There's such a personal nature to the Wolfman. And
Yeah.
when we will not talk about that movie today. But
No.
when we do, we're gonna get to talk about that a little bit
Yes.
more. So I do really like that one. I've always liked Creature from the Black Lagoon. I don't know what it is about that one.
Yeah.
It's just like
yeah.
I always like the design of that
Mhm.
Yeah.
creature and
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah.
I thought it was cool.
Yeah.
I think after talking about horror last year, Frankenstein kind of stands out
Yeah.
just because of just the social message that it has.
Mhm.
The message and just Frankenstein being so influential and iconic. And
Yeah. that's
probably,
true.
yeah. I mean, just probably the most famous of all of the movies.
Yeah.
Right.
I would
Yeah.
say.
We talked about Frankenweenie, which is
Yes.
essentially the same thing.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So just with a dog.
All right. So let's get into some history, guys. You want to talk about the...
Dive right in.
Yes, so we're going to start by just talking about the history of the Universal Monsterverse.
Juicy.
You can close your eyes now. It's time for a nap.
Nap time with the VC.
Let me lull you to sleep. Hollywood has always been a tough industry to break into, but back in the early days of film, it was essentially impossible. The already established studios held patents for nearly every kind of film equipment, meaning that no one could use the tools needed to create motion pictures without certain permissions. Enter Carl Laemmle, a German-born Jewish immigrant who sought to defeat what he called the film octopus.
Wow.
Laemmle forged ahead, generally disregarding the lawsuits that stood in his way. He purchased the now historic Universal Studio lot with the intention of creating full-length films. Most features at the time ran for about 20 minutes. He was sued over 200 times for violating patent law and eventually changed the film industry forever.
Wow. Just
Dang.
ignore it, basically.
Yeah, pretty much.
So go Carl Laemmle.
He was important. He was like this rogue, renegade, outlaw movie maker.
Yes.
Yes.
Love those.
Even though Laemmle was personally against making dark Gothic films, horror would soon become the perfect genre for his studio. Horror films are subversive, disregarding certain cultural norms, and featuring characters and actors that didn't fit Hollywood's picture-perfect aesthetic. It's a genre that appeals to outcasts, people that seemingly didn't have a place, and were forced to create their own.
Yeah.
100%. I mean, when you look at old movies, it just feels that way.
Mm-hmm.
You know, you get those same handsome actors and
Yes.
very, very beautiful actresses.
Mhm.
And it's just these very clean movies. I mean, sure, some of the happenings of those movies is not like clean, quote unquote, but it just felt very polished, and that's Hollywood, you know, about it. But the horror movies didn't have to follow any of that.
And
No.
and it's that trope that like, who likes horror movies? Weirdos.
Yeah.
Weirdos like horror movies,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah,
That's
you
the
know.
we see it in movies and TV all the time. He's quirky. He likes horror, you know? Like,
Yeah.
oh my gosh, she's not like other girls, you know? Like you know what I mean?
Yeah.
You see that stuff all the time. And a lot of it, you know, we talked about this in our history of horror episode from a couple of years ago, which I highly recommend if anybody wants to learn more about the history of horror as a genre. But we talked about it in that episode where, you know, for the first time, some people were getting represented that were not represented before, even if it was in a very negative way as like bad guys and monsters and that kinds of stuff.
Yeah.
But they were at least seeing themselves on the screen
Yeah.
and in some capacity. And then, you know, obviously it evolved over time. And it's not quite like that anymore, thank God.
Right.
But it was mainstream because of that, because so many people identified with these stories. The first Universal monster films were produced during the silent film era. Irving Thalberg, a 21-year-old secretary turned studio manager, produced an adaptation of Victor Hugo's The Hunchback of Notre Dame in 1923. At the time, the film was meant to be a historical drama, but it was Lon Chaney's performance as the titular character that grabbed the audience's attention. It wasn't a monster movie.
No.
I mean, Quasimodo was not supposed to be a monster.
Right.
No.
You were supposed to feel bad for him. Like, he was a sympathetic character.
Yes. Yeah, you're supposed to be like, oh,
That's what the
are
bad
you
guy's
doing to
telling-
him?
Yes,
Yeah,
Exactly. Chaney had been acting in film since 1912. He was known as the Man with 1,000 Faces because of his ability to transform into a variety of characters. His connection to audiences through his facial expressions was unmatched in the silent film era, and his mastery of makeup thrilled moviegoers. As Quasimodo, Chaney suffered while wearing a heavy plaster bodysuit and prosthetics that obscured his features. Chaney returned to the silver screen 2 years later in The Phantom of the Opera. This film will become a visual blueprint of sorts for the Universal horror films to come. This was really the first one. This was like really the
Right.
first
It-
monster movie.
even just based on the name of the movie,
Yeah.
Yeah.
it feels like it should be the first one, you know,
Yes.
the Phantom. of the Opera.
Phantom of the Opera. Carl Laemmle chose The Phantom of the Opera specifically as a vehicle for Lon Chaney. The French novel by Gaston Leroux wasn't nearly as well known at the time, but the story's main character, a composer that hides his true face behind a mask and lives beneath the Paris Opera, matched Chaney's talents. Universal censored Chaney's makeup and all promotional material and encouraged rumors that moviegoers were fainting at the sight of the Phantom. Some theaters even had ambulances stationed outside to suggest that the film would be too much for some viewers. The scene of the Phantom's unmasking became one of the most iconic moments in the silent film era. You've seen it.
Yeah.
If you've seen any compilation of movies and classic movies and stuff, you've seen she reaches very, very, very slowly over his face. He's playing piano.
Yep.
She pulls it off, and he looks right into the screen.
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
Chaney had worked to make his appearance as close to the book description as possible. However, it's easy to see how the physical affliction of the Phantom matches the injuries that many men sustained during World War I.
Yeah.
This is one of those things you were talking about in the past about how horror kind of mimics real life events.
Yep.
And something that was really, really scary at the time was, war and the long-term effects of it and people coming home from war and having illnesses and different kind of afflictions and things that were caused by the war. And so the Phantom looks like somebody who might have been a victim of some sort of physical trauma. I mean,
Yep.
Yeah, so it kind of matches that kind of the thing people were
afraid
afraid of.
happening.
Yeah. It like you said, it is that perfect blueprint.
Yeah.
Because it has that trope. So.
Yeah. Another iconic part of the film was the set of the Paris Opera House. It was the first steel and concrete stage created for Hollywood production and remained preserved for 90 years in Universal Studio 28.
Incredible.
That's crazy.
I know.
That's
I know.
a long time.
Has anything come close to that record?
I don't know.
I doubt it.
It was at
No, I
what
don't
it was
believe
the oldest studio in the world.
Yeah, I imagine.
Or the oldest set in the world, yeah. Ben Correa, a Frenchman familiar with the real opera house, designed the set. Although the film is in black and white, you will get a glimpse of the opera set in 2-color Technicolor during the masquerade sequence.
Yeah.
So obviously full color films weren't a thing until the mid to late 30s.
Mm-hmm.
So this is like 10 years before that, and we've got one scene where you see the Phantom coming down the stairs in like 2-color Technicolor, and he's got this like skull mask on.
Yeah, it's pretty terrifying.
Right? And he's this red. He's got this red cape, and
it's like a blood color,
yes,
basically.
Yes. Yeah, this skull mask is cool.
This is another one of those moments in history that I wish I could have been in the theater to see.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I want to see the reaction of the first audience to see something like that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know.
I mean, they said people screamed like
Right?
crazy. But I mean, was that true? Or
I know. I mean, they
Right.
start to question
is
that.
it good
since
marketing?
They had plants, so
Yeah, some people fainted in the aisles. They
Yeah.
had plants that would faint in the aisles and stuff like that. And going back to the Opera House set being 90 years old, so it was built in like 1924, and then in 2014 they demolished Studio 28 on the Universal lot in California. They said it was to make way for the theme park, more stuff in the theme park, and it was still in use at the time.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, it was used right
they
up until they
preserved
demolished
it
it.
so well.
It was perfectly preserved in there. They had made plans to meticulously
Move it.
Okay.
move the internal
Yeah.
set, move the set of the Phantom of the Opera House.
Okay.
But the thing
But it's like
is, I
they
found,
didn't,
yes,
right?
I found articles of them talking about doing that in 2014. But if you did that, where is it? Because I can't find
a
anything
thing saying
about where it
it's-
is now.
Yeah.
The film had a long and expensive production, but it proved worth it in the end. The Phantom of the Opera was a massive success and is considered by many to be the first, quote-unquote, monster movie. But it wasn't until 1931 that Universal would produce the first supernatural horror talkie, Bram Stoker's Dracula.
Oh
Yeah.
my
All right.
goodness. Here we go. everybody.
Yes. Now you can wake up now.
These are the kind of things that without them, none of the rest would happen.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right? We wouldn't have we'd be in a totally different timeline right now if the Phantom of the Opera didn't exist in the way that it does.
Yeah.
Right? So it's important stuff.
Yes. Yes. This
for
is
cinema
exciting.
as a whole.
It's exciting.
Yes.
Yes. So what we're going to do is we're just going to kind of go through and talk about the 2 first really big Universal horror monster movies.
Yeah.
We didn't have time to do the rest of them, and we want to do a part 2 at some point, but tonight we're just going to talk about the first 2. And you get an A+ if you already know what those are.
Yeah.
Besides the fact that I literally just said Dracula.
Yeah. If you don't remember what she just said.
if you were still asleep when I got to the end of the last one.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So without further ado, we will first be talking about Dracula.
Dracula.
Bram Stoker's novel Dracula was released in 1897. The story is told through letters, diaries, and newspaper clippings. Although it doesn't have a single protagonist, it begins with lawyer Jonathan Harker traveling for work to stay at Count Dracula's castle. The Count relocates to England and terrorizes the seaside village of Whitby when Harker escapes the castle and learns that Dracula is a vampire. Dracula is hunted by a tiny party commanded by Abraham Van Helsing, who eventually kills him.
I actually really like how this story is kind of told in this way, because it's so, I don't know, it feels kind of real that way.
It feels very real. It feels like Bram Stoker just collected all of this information from different people and different diaries. And in some ways he kind of did. I mean, he pulled from local legends and he pulled from accounts from different people and stuff. But like, obviously he created these characters and everything. So, but he wrote it in such a way that it seemed like you were legitimately reading a real story.
Yeah, it's cool. It's like you unearthed something that's like meant to be hidden. It's like something they covered up.
Yeah.
It's really cool.
That is so neat.
Yes.
Terrifying.
The majority of Dracula was written in the 1890s. For the book, Stoker wrote almost 100 pages of notes, heavily referencing Transylvanian history and folklore. There is a dispute regarding the claim that the character of Dracula was influenced by historical characters like the Countess Elizabeth Bathory or Vlad the Impaler, though both individuals are referenced in Stoker's notes. So according to NPR, Dracula refers to son of Dracul, which means son of the dragon or son of the devil.
Whoa, that's pretty cool.
Yeah. Pretty cool.
Pretty awesome.
Yeah.
I mean, the name Dracula has always been a really cool name, to be honest with you.
Yes.
It's just a really cool villain slash monster slash supernatural sounding name.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's got a good ring to it.
Yeah. So here is a little bit of a summary for you. In order to close a deal with Count Dracula, an estate agent named Renfield travels to Transylvania. Despite some of the neighbors' warnings, Renfield is unaware that Dracula is a vampire, and the visitor quickly becomes his unwilling servant. They sail to England, but when the ship arrives at the harbor, Renfield is the only one still alive. After moving into Carfax Abbey, Count Dracula immediately begins his quest to seduce the lovely Mina, who resides next door. Professor Van Helsing, who is fully aware of who Dracula is the only one left to halt the spread of his evil.
Oh, man.
It sounds just like a really cool fantasy story.
Yeah,
I don't know.
It
That's just it.
So when Carl Laemmle Jr. took over Universal, he was interested in dark Gothic storytelling. He suggested making an adaptation of a popular John Balderson play that had been highly successful. It was called Dracula, and it starred Bela Lugosi. Carl Laemmle Sr. was vehemently against the idea, asserting that no audience would be able to believe such a fantastic story. Many other film studios agreed, as they all turned down the chance to make the film. But Laemmle Jr. persisted.
So, this sounds ridiculous, right?
Yeah.
But this was their problem. Their problem was that they didn't think people would believe this movie about a vampire.
Yeah.
And at this point in time, American horror films or horror films in general, just they didn't have very many supernatural elements to them. They didn't think American audiences would believe that. So generally it was like, it was like Scooby-Doo. Like every movie was like Scooby-Doo, where it was like, old man Corcoran, like instead of like, you're the ghost haunting the lighthouse, it
had to be an explanation.
Yeah, there's always like a human behind it, causing it, like in the end, the Phantom in the Phantom of the Opera was a man.
Right.
You know what I mean? So,
that's true.
This whole idea is that people really, the studios did not think that audiences would be able to suspend their belief and think that even for only 2 hours,
that vampires exist.
Yeah. I'm sorry, 75 minutes.
Dracula began filming on September 29th, 1930. The production was shot mostly in continuity, which was and is a pretty rare way to film. The first words were spoken by Carla Laemmle, the niece of Universal Studios founder Carl Laemmle.
Yeah.
That's cute.
Nice.
So the movie starts with this carriage, and it's like a super bumpy carriage, and they're all like trying to ride over the mountains. And this girl she's reading like from a book out loud in the carriage, and so she reads like the first line, and then she gets thrown across the carriage to the other side, and they're like, "Hey, like slow down."
She gets literally thrown on somebody's lap.
So that's her. Wow. She reads the first line.
Yeah.
Hilarious.
The film was meant to be a large production, but had to be scaled back due to the Great Depression. Instead of basing the film largely around Bram Stoker's book, it was adapted mostly from the John Balderson stage play to save time and money.
And when you have a star that starred in the play,
that's true.
It's easier for him to play the character.
Yes.
Yep.
He already knows it. Less time. Dracula was almost directed by Paul Lenny, a filmmaker who played a key role in the German Expressionism movement. He directed some of Universal's silent horror films like The Man Who Laughs and The Cat That Ate the Canary. Lenny unfortunately developed fatal blood poisoning and was later replaced by Todd Browning.
Yeah, it's important to mention him and mention just the German Expressionism, because we talked about this before. I know I sound like a broken record, but we talked about this before. German Expressionism is a huge part of early horror films.
Yes, it was a major influence.
They were all basically like German Impressionist paintings.
Yeah. Browning was a successful silent film director, which translated well to the eerily silent Dracula. Audiences were used to full soundtracks accompanying silent films, so the lack of music in many of this film's scenes added tension. The minimal dialogue may have been for the best, as many theaters still did not have sound capabilities. So the film was also released in silent versions. That's nice, they kind of made it available for all.
Everybody.
Karl Freund helped direct but was uncredited. Freund was responsible for the camera visuals and was very vocal on the set. He was a pioneer of using tracking shots and movement with the camera.
That's nice. That's cool.
Yeah. In fact, somebody on one of the special features said that when people mentioned the directors, they didn't remember Todd Browning really, but they remembered. Because he was Freund, because he was just so vocal about everything.
Yeah. He left an impression.
Yeah, he left an impression because you got told if something was right or wrong.
After creating many set designs for Charlie Chaplin, art director Charles D. Hall came to Universal in 1923, where he designed The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Phantom of the Opera, Dracula, Frankenstein, and other sets. It is said that when he was designing the set for Dracula, he became so enthralled by the story that he locked himself in the studio and worked overnight, causing sleep deprivation.
Yikes, dude.
Mm-hmm.
At the time when Dracula was filmed, it was common to release in other languages, especially Spanish. Instead of dubbing over the English cast, a whole new cast, crew, and director were hired. Director George Melford and his cast and crew filmed at night after the English crew was done for the day. Melford was able to complete filming on a smaller budget and within half the time. The Spanish crew had an advantage by being able to see the dailies from the English production. This allowed for the analysis of shots and better ways to film and light. Many people believe that the Spanish version was technically a better film. Melford used techniques that made it more fluid and dramatic. The Spanish version is 29 minutes longer, contains more dialogue, and places more importance on religious aspects.
Interesting.
Yeah. They didn't dub back then. They were like, no, we'll just make a whole other movie.
We'll just film it twice. Crazy.
Yeah. And also, I mean, from all accounts, this movie's better. Like, this is a better version of Dracula.
Yep.
Except for one thing. They don't have Bela Lugosi in it. And because of that...
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I mean, that's the thing. Yeah. They said, like, honestly, if he had been in the Spanish version of Dracula, I mean, that'd be it, dude.
Yep.
That'd be it. Game changer. That would be the movie. If there was some way to combine these two movies together, done. Like, if you watch the shots like next to each other of the English and the Spanish version, like, it's so much more dynamic and interesting.
Yeah.
You know, it's just, it's just a way more interesting movie.
Yeah, it's just like, you know, if you get to look and see what they did, it's like, well, how do we improve each little piece of it?
Exactly.
Yep.
So
they used equipment. They used they wanted to one up the production as much as possible.
I think that was their goal. They were like, we are going to make a better movie,
and they succeeded.
They did.
Yeah.
Dracula would not have been nearly as iconic without the performance of its actors, especially Bela Lugosi. When Carl Laemmle Jr. secured the rights to make Dracula, he specifically stated that he did not want Bela Lugosi for the role.
Funny, isn't it?
Yeah.
I mean, he sent a telegram saying, I do not want him.
Laemmle had been told that he would only be able to secure funding for the film if the legendary Lon Chaney played both the part of Dracula and Van Helsing.
Kind of funny, isn't it?
Which is ridiculous. Why would you do that? Sadly, Lon Chaney was terminally ill with lung cancer and was not an option for the studio. That part sucks.
Yeah, no, it really does. I think the death of Lon Chaney was kind of a surprise, and it was a big deal. It was a huge blow.
Another option had been Conrad Veidt, who had been in the cabinet of Dr. Caligari, but he had moved back to Germany and was afraid that his imperfect English would not do well on screen.
Yeah, there's a lot to unpack in that sentence.
There is.
The Cabinet of Dr. Caligari was an incredibly influential silent horror film.
Yeah.
Some people think the first horror film.
Yeah.
Maybe. It's terrifying. It is. It's actually super scary.
Yep.
But also, this was a big problem when talkies came about.
Yeah.
You had a lot of European actors that looked American on screen as long as you didn't hear their voices, and then once talkies became a thing, they stopped being in movies because they were like, people aren't gonna like hearing me.
Even though all the story advisors were telling him no, Laemmle Jr. continued to push forward with the film. Finally, they considered Bela Lugosi because his stage performance of the role in the previous summer had done so well. Lugosi was so insistent on playing the role that he got the studio's attention by accepting pay that was a fraction of the salary that the juvenile lead received.
Yeah.
Which is madness.
Yes.
It literally is.
The movie, we cannot state this enough, the movie would not have been nearly as successful without him.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Like, he carried this movie on his back.
Yes. And yet...
And he got a fraction of the pay. Because they just didn't want him to do it. They just didn't...
Looking back, it's like, how could you ever consider someone else? I don't understand.
It's interesting,
like,
isn't it?
The mindset that they had to have been in.
I think maybe he just wasn't scary enough. I don't know. Because they wanted Lon Chaney to do it.
Exactly. It would have been a very different movie with Lon Chaney.
Yeah.
A lot of people wonder, like, what would it have been if it was Lon Chaney?
Lugosi was a well-practiced stage actor that had a hypnotic stare and an exaggerated way of reading lines. Fun fact, Lugosi was buried in a replica Dracula cape.
Yeah.
That's pretty cool.
Right?
So if they ever unearthed him.
Yep.
Yeah, if he comes back to life, he's already dressed the part.
Exactly. He was ready. Yeah.
Edward Van Sloan played Van Helsing, a character that would become synonymous with vampire hunting. He also had big parts in Universal's Frankenstein, The Mummy, and Dracula's Daughter.
Dracula's Daughter was a follow-up movie that wasn't nearly as successful years later. But the one big thing about Dracula's Daughter that makes it super important is that in Dracula, this movie, Dracula is not sympathetic at all. He does not care that he kills people. He has no remorse. And in a lot of these monster movies, they're sympathetic. The characters are far more sympathetic. And in Dracula, not at all.
Nope.
But Dracula's daughter, she did care. And she kind of felt bad about it. And she wanted to break the curse of being a vampire. And it didn't work. And she was killed anyway. But
Spoilers.
the idea of a sympathetic vampire,
Yeah.
which is far more popular now.
Mhm.
What?
Yes.
Yeah.
That was because of Dracula's daughter versus Dracula.
Yeah.
Helen Chandler plays the part of Mina Harker, the young woman that Dracula takes an interest in.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Dwight Fry played Renfield, Dracula's bug-hungry henchman and unwilling manservant. Fry was typecast throughout his career after this role.
Yeah.
After the commercial and critical success of Dracula, Universal released Frankenstein later that same year. Then, with more pictures like The Mummy from 1932, The Invisible Man from 1933, Bride of Frankenstein 1935, and The Wolfman of 1936, Universal would rise to the top of early horror cinema. Dracula has quite literally an undying legacy. Yes, pun intended. Its adult themes and suggestive imagery struck a previously untouched nerve in audiences everywhere.
Uh-huh. Horror films were also sexy. That was
Yeah.
something else that made them a little different.
Yeah.
I mean, you know what I mean?
They probably got, they're like, the average masses aren't watching this.
Yeah.
This is for the weirdos.
These
and stuff.
these movies, people were confused
Yeah.
about how they were supposed to feel.
Yeah.
Yeah.
About a girl laying, helpless in a bed
Yeah.
and Dracula standing over her body.
Yeah.
People were confused. They were like, what do I think about this?
Yeah,
And
what
then
am I?
he'd bite her neck and it was like,
Tasty.
Yeah.
I mean, oh no.
What? I can't have feelings.
Yeah.
I live in the 30s.
There's no time for that here.
Yeah, nope. Not allowed. The German expressionist aesthetic paid homage to the silent era horror films before it, and gave viewers something both familiar and groundbreaking. But Dracula's legacy would be almost non-existent without the performances of Bela Lugosi and Dwight Fry as Dracula and Renfield. Through their facial expressions, they are able to leave a lasting impression on the viewer, just like the face-based acting of the silent era. Renfield enters and exits situations with just the proper amount of craziness to keep his character engaging and irritating at all times.
That's important.
Yes. Bela Lugosi's Dracula has impacted how we see vampires today. Lugosi continuously fixes his vacant, hollow gaze on the camera, and the actor would come to be recognized for it. Lugosi had a very handsome face and intense stare. Because of this, the idea of the beautiful vampire has stuck around. Some examples of recent 21st century vampires show this to be true, like Twilight and The Vampire Diaries. We also now associate large, sweeping staircases, webs, dustiness, eeriness, and more with vampires because of Dracula.
Yes, and the Twilight vampire and the Vampire Diaries and all of that. Again, the sympathetic vampires
Yes. Yep.
came later.
Lugosi went on to appear in other horror films, including Abbott and Costello Meet Frankenstein.
A true horror classic.
Yeah,
Oh my gosh.
exactly. This is the scariest one of all.
I'm sure Adam couldn't even handle that one.
Yeah, nope.
Well, that's Dracula.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean,
Woo.
there's so much vampire content out there. I
Yep.
mean, not just movies, just characters in other shows are just vampires for cuz,
Yeah.
just to throw them in there.
Yeah.
But they all have their own unique spin. However, there are still those attributes that we all recognize as vampire.
Yeah. And Bela Lugosi, he really was the only person for Dracula. I think,
Yeah.
they talked about how a lot of people on the set and production were not taking it very seriously.
Mm-hmm.
And they said that they would say cut, and he would just walk up and down the set,
Oh my gosh.
and
Wow.
staring at himself in the mirror, watching him walk. And he would say,
I am Dracula.
Like he would do that, like
Nice.
flipping his cape around. He
very
was
odd.
Yeah. Yeah, he was
very committed.
If I was like crew on that set, I'd be like,
You don't think you'd want to go and hang out with him?
no, okay.
While Dracula may have been the first supernatural horror talkie, the next film in the Universal catalog would one day be known as a masterpiece of horror. Directed by James Whale, Frankenstein also premiered in 1931. The original story of Frankenstein was written by Mary Shelley. The idea came over an 1816 vacation in Geneva when she, her husband Percy Bash Shelley, and their friends Lord Byron and John Polidori were stuck inside for multiple days due to inclement weather. After discussing many horror stories, Lord Byron proposed a competition to write the best ghost story.
Wow.
Shelley, who was only 19, produced the concept of Frankenstein, the modern Prometheus. Needless to say, she won the competition. The origin story of Frankenstein is portrayed in the beginning of Bride of Frankenstein. Bride of Frankenstein is a later movie,
Yeah.
and at the very beginning, we have a really fun little scene where they show them stuck inside on a rainy vacation.
Astonishing creature.
I, Lord Byron?
Frightened of thunder, fearful of the dark, and yet you have written a tale that sent my blood into icy creeps. Look at her, Shelley. Can you believe that bland and lovely brow conceived of Frankenstein? A monster created from cadavers out of rifled graves? Isn't it astonishing?
Such a crazy thing that happened. Like, you don't imagine something this profound and important to literature in general to have come from something as silly as just a writing competition between like friends.
Right.
Yeah.
The novel was a success, and it translated well to the stage. The very first on-screen adaptation of Mary Shelley's work was done in 1910 by Thomas Edison. The stage play that influenced the movie Frankenstein the most premiered in 1927 and was written by Peggy Webling. In the stage production, the actor Hamilton Dean wore a wig, had a mixture of greens and yellows and blues for face makeup, and wore lifters under his shoes to look bigger. So early ideas of Frankenstein,
Yep.
of what he might look like. The Frankenstein's monster, quote-unquote monster in the book, there really isn't a lot of description, but also it's just like, you just kind of imagine a bunch of dead body parts. Like,
Yeah.
the idea of him being tall with the thick shoes and the green face and the square head, the bolts on his neck, I don't, that's not, I don't.
Where did it come from?
Yeah. This is.
You just think flesh that's exposed.
Yes.
And
Yeah. Just think of a really ugly looking dude. Like, that's pretty much what it was in the book.
So for those of you who haven't seen this 1931 version of Frankenstein, here's a summary. A clever scientist named Henry Frankenstein has been experimenting with reviving dead bodies. After experimenting on tiny creatures, he is now prepared to instill life in a creature he has built from body pieces. Due to the excessive amount of time he spends in his laboratory conducting his research, his fiancée Elizabeth and friend Victor Moritz are concerned for his health. He is successful, and the life he has created is kind, but confused and unable to interact with the world around him. Henry's father, Baron Frankenstein, convinces him that the monster should be eliminated humanely. However, the creature escapes, and in its innocence, it murders a young girl. The people of the town rise up, determined to slay the misunderstood being.
No.
The scene with the little girl is really hard to watch, I think, for a lot of reasons, but I think it's just like, as you're watching it, you're just like so on edge.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
It's
it happens in a lot of movies and TV where you kind of understand the story already, and you're just seeing this. It's like, something bad is about to happen.
Yeah.
And it's just the anticipation.
Since Dracula was such a large hit, Laemmle Jr. had an easier time getting Frankenstein as the next movie. Frankenstein would require far more special effects than Dracula. The production spent $10,000 on the equipment that would create the lightning needed for the film's most iconic scene.
$10,000.
Yeah.
1931.
That's a lot for one part.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, of course it created like the most iconic
Yeah.
mad scientist
Part of it,
moment
yeah.
of history.
Yeah.
But it's a
still.
lot of money.
Frankenstein's monster is one of the most memorable images of the 20th century. However, his looks did not come directly from Mary Shelley's book. Her description leaves a lot to the imagination. The look of the monster may have come from a character that James Whale played on the stage in a play called A Man with Red Hair. The story is of a woman who is trapped in a marriage and a man that tries to help her out of it. It is based on a book, A Portrait of a Man with Red Hair. The book description says, "The man standing beside her was not much more than a boy, but Harkness thought that he had seldom perceived an uglier countenance. A large, broad nose, a long, thin face like a hatchet, gray, colorless eyes, and a bony body, upon which the evening clothes sat awkwardly. Here was ugliness itself. But the true unpleasantness came from the aloofness that lay in the unblinking eyes, the hard, straight mouth."
Ugh. Okay.
Frankenstein's walk may have been inspired by a character in the 1927 film Sunrise. The character wore boots made with lead.
Hmm.
Okay,
Interesting.
yeah.
We've
to
got
make
the
it
big,
heavier.
bulking boots.
Yeah.
You know?
It always kind of, I guess it makes sense because it always kind of reminded me of the way zombies walk, like the stereotypical zombie walk.
Yeah. Yeah.
But he kind of is one in a way, right?
Right.
He was just created in a lab this time.
Yeah.
so-
Yeah. Legendary makeup artist Jack Pierce brought Frankenstein's monster to life with groundbreaking special effects, makeup, and a little help from Boris Karloff himself.
Jack Pierce.
The 1910 Edison version that was mentioned previously displayed a large forehead and may have inspired the elongated section of the head. The brow was made using cotton, collodion, and spirit gum. It was built up on Karloff's head every day that they shot.
Damn.
I would get,
Interesting.
yeah. And then imagine just like taking all that gunk off, like,
Yeah.
and they said the spirit, I believe it was the spirit gum, had a very like alcohol awful smell,
Ugh.
and so like having that on every day, I could not even imagine.
I just imagine
Bro.
the headaches.
I know
Yeah.
it probably gave. I mean, I can't. It had to have.
I know what it's like to wear grease paint all day,
Yeah.
and even that isn't fun.
Yeah.
So,
For real.
Karloff felt his eyes looked too alive, so he had Pierce build up the lids with mortician's wax.
so that his eyes look droopy.
Yeah. Karloff had false teeth, which he removed so that he could suck in his cheek during his performance. Yeah. Just like
Ooh,
the
that's
sallow
kind of
look.
a lucky
Yeah,
thing,
Yeah.
suck
man.
him
I
in even more than
guess. Ugh.
It took about 3 to 3.5 hours to apply all the makeup.
Dude, that's one part of Hollywood in general that just I don't understand. That part of it would make me go, well, we'll just CG. As much as I love practical, I couldn't imagine sitting in a
The
chair
time, yeah.
and just
Yeah.
have people putting stuff on me for 3.5 hours.
Yeah.
Ugh. Charles Hall worked with James Whale to create the Mad Scientist Lab, which had the iconic tower.
Oh, yeah.
Within this tower is a plethora of machinery that gives off sparks. Kenneth Strickfaden was responsible for these light-producing mechanisms that he named the Megavolt Senior, the Neutron Analyzer, Cosmic Ray Diffuser, and the Baratron Generator.
That guy should have written for sci-fi.
Yeah.
I know, right?
Those are the most sci-fi names.
Yes, Baratron Generator sounds like what would power the Enterprise.
One scene required an intense amount of electrical power that Karloff was not comfortable being around. When this scene was shot, Strickfaden doubled for Karloff. At one point, he came into contact with 1,000,000 volts, which lifted him off the ground.
Good Lord. Dude, why?
Dude, this guy
Yeah.
was a mad
Yeah,
scientist.
he literally
Holy
Like,
was.
cow.
he legitimately was.
And he lived after that, too. He lived
Dude.
to at least 85, if not
Dude, some
later.
people are just built different. Like, I don't know.
Oh my
A
gosh.
million volts?
Like,
Yeah.
Bro.
I hope he got superpowers after it at least.
They promoted the film by placing ambulances and people screaming in the showings.
At one point, Bela Lugosi was considered for the leading role. He maintained that he turned down the part of Frankenstein's monster because it was just a grunting creature. According to Hollywood rumors, however, Carl Laemmle Jr. saw the screen test of Lugosi as Frankenstein, and he did not like it, supposedly even laughing at the image of Lugosi in makeup. Boris Karloff was a relatively unknown actor at the time, but James Whale felt like he had the right qualities. Legend has it that James Whale saw Boris Karloff in the commissary and thought that he would be perfect for the role. Karloff was a bit hurt because he was wearing his best suit that day and was well dressed. He was smart enough, however, to still take the role.
Oh.
So he came over, he said he was enthralled by his cheekbones. He saw his cheekbones and was like, oh, all right, this guy...
Wow, you look dead.
Yeah, you got some monstrous...
You're perfect.
You got some monstrous cheekbones.
Yeah, your face looks hollow.
Yeah.
This was Karloff's 81st role, and he lost 25 pounds during filming. He had been in a lot of stuff, but he still wasn't really like a household name.
Mm-hmm.
Though Karloff referred to the monster as his very best friend, he ended up having 3 back surgeries from all that he had to put his body through for the film. The role required lots of heavy lifting.
Excuse me?
Yeah.
Yep.
Back surgery?
Mm-hmm.
Yep.
3.
No
Yeah.
thanks.
And you know, he had 3 back surgeries, and he appeared as Frankenstein 2 times after.
Yeah.
And after those 2 times, he said, no,
no more.
not doing it anymore.
Mm-mm.
Yeah.
Jeez.
Yeah.
That's crazy.
Yeah, so I don't blame him
Nope.
Yeah, absolutely.
for eventually putting that to bed.
He destroyed his body
Yeah.
for art.
So many of them do, right?
Yep.
You know?
Yep.
It's- yeah, wow. Dedication.
Yep.
Dracula may have jump-started the Monsterverse, but Frankenstein ensured that it would continue. This film is one of the most classic features in Hollywood history, and is also one of the most imitated.
Yeah, so, yeah, Dracula, important.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Frankenstein, a masterpiece. Like,
Yeah.
this is pretty much, I mean, yeah.
It actually kind of blows me away that they did them both in the same year.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's like, dang, you really nailed it.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah, I can't believe it. Like, oh my gosh.
Yeah, of course, like, with these 2 right after each other, that's
Yeah.
when they were like, we're making a million of these. We're gonna come up with as many
Yep.
monsters
Yep.
and scenarios.
They were like, Carl Laemmle Sr., get over it. We're just doing
get
it.
over it, dude.
Yep.
We're doing horror, okay? Yeah, it's what the people want.
Audiences flocked to see Frankenstein because they craved escapism during an uncertain time. It was, funnily enough, just what the doctor ordered.
Dr. Frankenstein.
Lol. Good one. Few figures in pop culture are as immediately recognizable as Frankenstein's monster. If you're familiar with the mad scientist motif, Dr. Frankenstein is said to be the first. It is here that Frankenstein has had the most impact on popular culture. Think of all the TV shows and movies that feature a mad scientist. There's so many.
Yeah.
And they all kind of
Yep.
feel the same, you know. We likely wouldn't have films like The Fly or The Rocky Horror Picture Show if Frankenstein didn't exist. There have also been films based entirely on the Frankenstein concept, such as Son of Frankenstein, Bride of Frankenstein, The Ghost of Frankenstein, and numerous others.
Oh, yeah.
Mhm.
They could not put this one away.
Yeah,
Nope.
absolutely not. And Frankenstein appears in a bunch of other things that aren't necessarily Frankenstein
Right.
movies, too. We can still learn from the original narrative of Frankenstein, though the character's use in much of modern culture is more gimmicky and fun. We think of our own humanity as a result of how terribly the story treats Frankenstein's monster. Are we the monsters? Because Shelley was able to look inward at herself and her humanity, it inspires us to do the same. Frankenstein also asks the question, can man create life? And where there is life, is there a soul? While Frankenstein's story is now 200 years old, it still conveys a timeless message of acceptance and kindness to those around you.
There's so many lessons in
Yeah.
Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Whole thing about, who is the monster and who is the man.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
That entire, I mean, which is The Hunchback of Notre Dame, Phantom of the Opera, Dracula, and Frankenstein. It's kind of like a sandwich. You have Hunchback of Notre Dame and Frankenstein. Mm-hmm. They're misunderstood and they're treated very unfairly. Mm-hmm. And then you've got these two in the middle here, Phantom of the Opera and Dracula. I would say Phantom a little more innocent than Dracula, but it's not like he was a good guy. Okay,
no.
It was, you know,
yeah.
You know,
unless
I mean,
you watch the Gerard Butler version.
Right. So anything you guys want to say before we wrap up? Those were the two ones we wanted to talk about tonight.
Yeah, like I said a minute ago, I so surprised and amazed that they got these two like banger monsters out right away.
Yeah.
You know, they just hit the ground running and skyrocketed this genre into what it is now, right?
Yeah.
There's so many more following this that are just as well known.
Yeah.
Especially in the minds of horror fans. Mm-hmm. And it's all thanks to these like first ones doing so well. Yeah,
this was obviously very, very important to the horror genre, but it was also really important to Universal Studios themselves.
Oh, yeah.
And what it would become. You know, Universal is one of those studios that's kind of like blockbusters, you know, Jaws and E.T. and Jurassic Park. You know, those are all Steven Spielberg movies, but they're all movies that feature movies that feature a quote unquote monster in some capacity, right?
Right.
You know, E.T. obviously is not a monster, but you know what I mean? Mm-hmm. It's kind of like that. If movies like this didn't exist, if this didn't happen, there would be no Jurassic Park. Sorry.
What a sad life.
Yeah. There's no way. So, yeah. So, you know, a lot of really good came out of this. You know, Carl Laemmle, you know, kind of taking down the studio system as much as he could at the time. He did a really good thing.
There's some positive changes in there.
Yeah.
And because of these, it's just these incredibly iconic characters and monsters that are ingrained in pop culture now. Not even, at this point, not even horror based.
Yeah.
Like,
they're just a part of the monster mash.
They're just part of everything. Yeah, seriously. You just draw a face with fangs and like pop the collar up. Boom, Dracula.
Yeah.
Everyone immediately recognized. Then the square head with the green. Boom, immediately Frankenstein. It's just everyone knows. It's so ingrained. In pop culture and in Halloween. You see them all the time. It's they are bigger than themselves at this point.
Yeah, they've transcended their niche. They've transcended their genre. I mean, at this point, it's like you have horror and people go, well, I'm not really interested in horror, but they'll still watch these movies. Yeah. And a lot of what they enjoy in film is because of movies like this.
Yeah.
So it is important to know this history and you can at least appreciate it.
Yep. And now I want to watch the Spanish version of Dracula.
Yes, because
it looks pretty darn good.
It looks super good.
I kind of want to watch them side by side.
Yeah.
I bet you could probably find a compilation
probably.
of some of like the more iconic scenes.
Yeah.
If you're a fan of horror, you owe at least a small debt of gratitude to the Universal Monster movies. These features helped prove the commercial value of horror films and pave the way for frightening films of the future. Movies like Dracula and Frankenstein made innovations in makeup and special effects that would alter cinema forever. But possibly the most important gift that the Universal Monsters gave us was their storytelling. These so-called creatures had humanizing stories that had audiences feeling conflicted about their eventual fates. These films centered on already existing characters that were more complex than your average run-of-the-mill monster of the week. Some of them were misunderstood beings with feelings and desires, and some of them were Dracula. They were the heroes of their own stories. The impact of the Universal Monsterverse is immeasurable. It's been almost 100 years since Bela Lugosi uttered the words, "I am Dracula." And yet he remains the most prominent archetype for a vampire. Look closely at any depiction of Frankenstein, and you will find the unmistakable features of Boris Karloff. When these faces appeared on the screen, they changed cinema forever, creating a legacy of monstrous proportions.
How many did you count? How many monster puns?
Go back. Count them all.
Yeah.
Okay, guys. That is a case closed. Woo!
Good one.
We did it.
Yay.
We did it.
Oh, goodness. This is, last thing real quick, though. As the resident not horror liker,
Yeah.
these, like you said, these have transcended that. And
Yeah.
they're just icons of cinema.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So,
They are.
And I can appreciate that,
Mm-hmm.
despite not liking scary things very much.
To be fair, some of these movies are still pretty scary.
Yeah.
I know a lot of the time it's like, it's old, so it's not scary anymore.
Like,
Mhm.
Some of these,
I mean,
this is terrifying.
If you go back to our one where we talked about Night of the Living Dead,
It's true.
that's an old movie. That made me feel real uneasy afterward. So,
Yeah, you think you're safe. You're like, oh, it's old.
Yeah.
no, not always.
No,
Not always.
No.
No.
They still get you.
Well, thank you
right.
so much for listening to our episode.
Yeah.
Thank you to our patrons, John, JD, Anthony, Shelley, Bob, Jaron, Brad, and Jacob. Thank you so much, guys.
Yes.
We really
Thank you all
appreciate it.
very much.
We hope you enjoyed the
Yeah.
extended version of this episode.
Yes.
Yes. And please don't forget, if you want to join us February 27th for our live episode at 8 p.m. Eastern Time, we are going to do an episode about literary references and Are You Afraid of the Dark, the 90s Nickelodeon TV show.
Yes.
We recorded an interview with DJ McHale,
Which was super awesome.
which
Yeah.
we will include.
You definitely want to see
And
that.
it's
you
super,
definitely
super
do.
cool. So thank you so much, everybody. And thank you to everyone who supports us, no matter if it's through listening, telling a friend, or donating.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And
We
Appreciate it very
Yeah.
much. BlackCaseDiaries.com.
yes,
Get your tickets.
tickets. Yeah, get your tickets.
Do it.
All right, bye.
Bye.
Look, it's moving. It's alive. It's alive. It's moving. It's alive. Oh, it's alive. It's alive. It's alive. It's alive. Oh, in the name of God. Now I know what it feels like to be